an ultimate global podcast. Hello, and welcome to our special weekly podcast on trending international and social affairs. You're listening to Saurabh Kora and George Mavros from Sydney.
So welcome to another exciting episode of the Ultimate Global Podcast. In this episode, we are talking about, again, a special series of episodes where we discuss with CEOs, founders, and new co-founders who have started something of their own recently. And it's always interesting to know their journeys, what are the challenges they're facing, what are some of the lessons that they want to share with other founders, other co-founders, or people who might be in the similar area or who might have willingness to start something of their own. So I think it's a great series where we want to motivate new entrepreneurs, and we also want to encourage people to think creatively, think innovatively, and definitely come out of your comfort zone. I'm sure my guests will agree with that. I'm joined by Ryan Nindra. He is the founder of Starlite, and he is
Hello.
also the management consultant at EY. But I would love to know more about Starlight, Ryan, because I think this is something you've started during the university. So I'll pass it on to you, Ryan. Give your introduction and tell us a bit more about Starlight.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for the lovely introduction, Saurabh. So yes, I'm Ryan. I am a founder and also a management consultant. The firm that I founded is called Starlite, and it does trace back to when I started university. I think the best way to describe how it came about would be to look at how university is today. So traditionally, if you go back, sort of 30, 40 years ago, university was sort of a key card into the corporate world. A lot of people who did business, for example, university was seen as sort of the entryway through that. Now, I think back then, as we progressed forward through things like IT and automating things, there were some opportunities in business to grow. I talk about business because that was what I did. So I did applied finance and economics when I went to uni, which was part of the Macquarie Business School. And I think now when you pan towards sort of recent times, let's say 2010 onwards, the competitiveness of uni has become unprecedented. It's a rat race to get to the top, and it's so hard to diversify yourself in what is becoming an increasingly competitive environment. So I founded Starlite as a way to act as a launch pad for young professionals who are looking to get industry experience. It started off as a company which simply hosted networking events. I would get people into a room. I would get 3 to 4 speakers from one specific area, and I get them to talk and then have some sort of networking happening afterwards. And the entire model was to link up young people who were willing to jump into industry with people who could help them get there. But I think now it's become something beyond that. Networking has always been at the heart of what Starlight's about, but now it's stretched towards career mentoring and career coaching to really help young people understand how they can improve themselves and to help them goal set on what they think they want to do. Because now getting there is getting tougher and tougher. And I know I've obviously felt this way too, but I know a lot of my peers throughout university themselves also had almost no clue what they wanted to do. So sometimes trying to narrow it down a bit for students is a big part of what I also do, to help them understand what they truly enjoy, what they're good at, and finding that unique nexus in between to help them launch their career. And that's what Starlight's about. There you go.
You pointed a bit of clarification here, Ryan. So how would you differentiate Starlight from any club or society from in a university? Because a lot of clubs and societies do these kind of networking events for students and link them up with industry, link them up with other peers in the university. So how are you going to link it up with that part? And how do you think it's different from others?
That's a very, very good question. It's actually one of the few things that I had thought about when I first started going, really my competition is not just other companies or businesses that host their own networking events. It's also a bunch of societies that do the exact same. I think the key differentiator, though, is if you look at a society, it is based around something. You could have a finance and investment society. You could have a law society, an art society. And I think the events surrounding societies are only ever pandering to a field, a sector. For example, the legal sector, the finance sector, it could be the medical sector, etc. There's plenty to go on. To give an example, the first event that I had done was actually focused on corporate skills. So I got someone who worked inside a government department. I got someone who worked in a bank. I got someone who worked previously as a lawyer and was acting as a management consultant. So I think the differentiator is not so much that I don't focus on sector, but I focus on skill. And I think that's a nicer way to put it, because I'm a big believer that no matter what you do in university, you are not limited to doing that outside. You're not limited to doing whatever's inside your degree. So to give context, I've known people who've gone to do psychology degrees who now work in a bank. And you'd think that the nexus between that is very little to find, but actually, plenty of HR professionals, for example, would benefit from doing a degree in psychology, who would then go on to do something in, a bank. So my focus was always, and has always been, I should say, more on skills than sector, because if people have the skills, they can get experience horizontally, and I think that's a very important thing to look at.
Absolutely. I've got a set of questions definitely for you, but I'll pass it on to George, because I'm sure that George is going to have some more questions on your business. So George, any questions from your side?
So the people that you're trying to assist, Ryan, are they from any particular school or all schools within the university? So you're focusing on only...
It's a really good question. I think generally it is students who are in some sort of business field. To be honest, that's just sort of what I've worked with at the moment. And I think me having done a degree within a business field, currently working within the business sector, if you will, because it's so broad in itself, I think that's where I feel I can hone my skills a lot more. But as Starlite expands, I'd love to bring on more mentors, for example, from different areas who can help other students too. But my focus has definitely been on people who want to work in business, if that makes sense. Not so much about their background, but perhaps what their skills are.
Mm-hmm. And what have you found has been the common thread or the most likely thing that those people are craving for or needing?
I think it's a mix between direction and transparency. I'll go into a bit of detail about that. I think direction goes back to when I mentioned that business is so broad. So sometimes knowing which kind of path to take to begin with is super important. So like, for example, I had one student who was very set on banking, but had zero clue if they wanted to do investment banking, commercial banking, private wealth, asset management, where they wanted to sit. And so we sat down and I said, okay, well, what interests you? What have you read about the most? What do you enjoy learning about? And through all of that and through all those questions, we narrowed it down that he actually would have enjoyed something like private wealth. So we started building him up for those interviews. We started getting him involved in societies at university. And he actually ended up landing an internship later on at a small private wealth firm. So that's direction. I think transparency more refers to what the growth within that direction looks like. To give a good example here, if you're working in any major, accounting or consulting firm, the ranks you have are very consistent between those. So there is a sense of transparency where I know what to expect next. I know what I'm aiming for, etc. But I think as you go down towards those perhaps smaller firms or the more unique firms that you find in the market, sometimes that transparency isn't always there. So it's about helping them understand what their goals should be over several different timelines. And I think that's one thing that I've noticed, no matter what students want to go for, it's that transparency direction that they're always looking for. And they tend to make most of those decisions by themselves. It's just more the push and the prompt that we give to help them really dig deep to figure out what they actually want to do.
Very good. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Of course.
I would love to know, Ryan, as we ask a lot of founders who have been a part of this special series, is what are the challenges that you're currently facing? So different founders have different challenges depending upon the stage of their startup. If they are early stage, early startup, they're still at their early stages, they'll have challenges regarding their funding and other things. Maybe they have advanced to a certain level, they might have challenges setting up their teams and getting the things done. What are the challenges that you are currently facing, because you're still at a very early stage?
Yeah, it's a really good question. 3 come to mind. And I'll do them in order of how big the challenge is. I think the first one, and this is something that I know a lot of early stage founders will find, is staying consistent. It's very tough when you don't see any growth and you have to keep on pushing through and doing what you do in the hopes it will grow at some point. Especially because this has sort of run parallel to my university/career journey. Whilst this has obviously remained kind of similar from the business side, personally, jumping from uni to full-time work, a lot of change has happened there. And I think as a result, it has been harder and harder to try and remain consistent when there's so many external factors that are consistently changing. So that's number one. I think number two, and we touched upon this earlier, was the sheer level of competition for this, right? Trying to find a differentiation for networking, which in itself is very difficult to do because networking is networking at the heart of it, right? So I think that was number two. Number three is the learning journey that you go through consistently. Every day you learn something new about running a business. Like, to give you an example, when I started, I had no clue how to market anything. I never done marketing before, right? I had no clue how to register a business name. I had no clue what the tax implications were. So when you sort of jump straight into it, you go, holy crap, there's so many things that I have to know, so many things that I have to do. And it can be very overwhelming. But the beauty of that is, as you go through it and as you persevere through it, you learn so much. So as much of a challenge as that has been, I would equally say that has also reaped the most rewards for me personally, because I've learned more about how to run a business alongside learning a lot more about myself and my own capability. But yeah, I think every day when you learn something new, it comes via a lesson. And that is definitely in itself some form of challenge.
I know George has worked with a lot of startup founders, and he is, in fact, coaching different sales teams and different businesses on strategies. Now, today's topic is getting your hands dirty. And I think getting your hands dirty, not only as a startup founder, but any, sales that you are doing in an established business. Well, it's all about trying out different strategies and seeing which one is working. So, what have you found, George, while you were working with startup founders, as to what kind of strategies would successful founders apply?
I think I can honestly say, in whether they're startups or they're established or whatever, over the many years, I've always insisted, if I was representing somebody, so whether I was working in the company as a salesperson or I was an external sales consultant or a broker for that company or a sales agent, all the many terms that we love to have in sales, the first thing that I would do is, in Australia, I would insist on walking through the factory or the office or the operation to understand what happens. When I took over as managing director for Artline in New South Wales, I had worked in the warehouse, I had worked in the office, I had worked with customer complaints, I'd been on the road, I'd done every damn job there was in the place, and I wanted to make sure that I kept doing that. So I had a schedule that always, every single week, I was in a different department in the business for at least a couple of hours. And I would go down and pick orders, and I would unload the truck, and I would do all those sorts of things. And what that gave me was insight into what the hell is happening in this business. When I've taken on, and I've walked through the factory before I started selling, when I was thinking about giving a discount on something, I knew how much you had sweated on the production line to make that thing. So I'm not giving away your money very easily. By working the production line or the service area or whatever, it gives me an understanding as a sales and a marketing person not to overpromise, but to underpromise and overdeliver, because you understand the workings of the business. So people that run a business, in particular startups or whatever, it's very important to get your hands dirty and keep them dirty. Because when you get to the point where you're too busy to be down on the shop floor, you don't know what's happening on the shop floor. And that's whether it's an industrial or a techo or whatever, the importance of management to know what's actually happening, how their people are experiencing things. That's what it's about.
I've been in touch with international students recently. I was an international student when I came in 2019. One of the biggest challenge that this particular sector faces, and I was also the student representative representing students at UNSW Academic Board. One of the biggest issue international students face till now is the fact that they are not getting relevant internships, relevant job opportunities while they are studying, and I think that's something which needs to be filled in by companies like Starlite, where you connect students with potential companies according to their interest areas, according to what they are interested in, and it's pretty much linked to what George is also trying to do at his level, which I am sure he would be happy to share with if he wants to. So I think if we can bring the universities, the industry together on this, and also the government to make sure that international students get a better experience while they're studying, and not only work in hospitality jobs, because a lot of the times I feel international students are forced to work in hospitality. They don't want to work, but they're forced to work there because they don't have any other alternative, and they have to meet their ends. They have to meet their financial needs for their living. And very sad to see some international students coming to me and asking me if I can help them out in getting some jobs in the industry. And the only thing I could do as a student representative was to utilize my network and probably get them connected to someone in the industry. So, what do you think about this, Ryan? Is this a really big problem that you also witness in this industry?
100%. The best teams that I've worked with have always had people not just from Sydney or Australia. It's been highly integrated global teams every single time. It is, of course, I think it's a big problem in that there is a big disparity between domestic international students in terms of those things like internships and graduate jobs. And it does seem like a very industrial and a very structural issue in itself. So no, it is heartbreaking to see, because there are so many insanely hardworking international students that I know, that are very deserved of fantastic jobs, but just because perhaps a lack of experience or a lack of industry exposure, they're not able to get it, despite the fact that they are very much an ideal candidate. So no, I do agree. I think it is quite a massive issue, but there is hope in that I've seen slowly that this gap is starting to close down a lot, especially over like the last year. I think post-COVID as well, I have seen a lot more international students who I've been connected with through uni actually landing really good jobs in areas that they're very, very happy into. But there is still a long way to go on that road before the disparity is completely, mitigated, doesn't exist.
Yep. And I think I would love to know from you, George, what do you think on the same topic? You deal with international students, and I'm sure that you would like to address this as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, we've now changing the rules to allow international students a bit more flexibility in being able to work, because we're in such a mess for workforce thanks to the COVID situation. But I have a student that I've mentored for a number of years, who's completed his university studies in HR management, and then had to go and do I think a 6-month or a 9-month course to get a Cert 4 as a chef, so that he could work in an Indian restaurant, because he wasn't able to secure a position as a HR person. That to me is just absolutely shattering, to think that the time and effort that young man's put in the money that's been spent by him, his family, and society, and the system, and we've put him through the mill of a university so that he can flip rice and veggies. Come on, there's got to be a better system. Just on that, Ryan, I'd be more than happy for you to connect with me after the podcast, because I'm not sure if you've heard of an organisation called BNI, which is the biggest and best networking group in the world. I'll organise for you to attend a meeting with me. I'm in the process of taking university students to BNI meetings, and a uni student could come with me to a meeting in Sydney, and I could introduce them to 295,000 members in 76 countries around the world. And it would be, and basically I have an app on this phone, and if you tell me what profession in what country you're looking to connect with, I can introduce you to somebody. And my concept is to help uni students meet business people, and business people meet uni students, because the business people get to meet the cream of the crop because you've actually got out of bed and done something for yourself. And the uni students get to find out what business is all about, especially in business networking. So far, we've had Sarab and a few other of my mentorees come with me, and each one of them has picked up valuable connections from that. And I think that's got to be expanded. And so I'm in negotiations with the CEO of BNI, and hopefully we will see that globally within a year or so.
That's brilliant, and it sounds like a very exciting thing for lots of students. They would definitely benefit from something like that. Absolutely.
What are some of the networking resources? Since we're talking about networking, Ryan, would love to know what are some of the networking resources you would recommend to students if they are in Sydney and Australia. We know that they can connect with people like George Mavros, who is a wonderful business mentor, and then connect with startup hubs like Fishburner, Sydney Startup Hub. I used to attend a lot of events from there, become a part of the university clubs. Any other things that's in specific you find they should make use of?
Look, I think from like a business student's perspective, I actually found Society ones to be super helpful when you're looking from an industry perspective. If I want to work in, banking and finance, there's a society for that. There are sponsors for that society who love hosting these networking events for them. I think it's a good place to start. Anything university-based is the best place to start, because that's the first sort of touch point you have with bigger companies, that might have a greater hiring capacity, for example. But there are other like student associations, like ABSA, for example. I think it's the Australian Business Student Association, that exists, that also do have events outside of university contexts that are still targeted towards university students. In saying that, though, I think the ones that I have found to work the best for myself, for example, when I was a student, not knowing what the hell was going on, was actually events hosted by companies. For example, Westpac, Combank, ANZ, ASX. They're the four I remember I went in my first year of university. And I was like, oh my God, there are so many different things that we can do here. It was all very interesting, but it was hosted by the company itself. And the beauty of that is that often these networking evenings are a good place to touch points with professionals working in that specific company, for example. It's the first place where you can make a genuine connection with someone and really find out entry pathways into companies that are not your traditional sort of hiring practices. There's a beautiful stat that I read. This was a couple of years back, and I'm sure this number's only increased. It was 86% of hires, I think, in 2021 or 2019. It was either just before or just after the initial COVID outbreak. 86% of hires were either internal through business promotions and such, or through networks, which means 14% of total hires across Australia in one of those 2 years was done externally through either hiring like websites like Seek or Indeed, or through, for example, if I'm applying to create content, that catchment 14%, automatically you're immediately faced with an increased amount of competition because you are part of a very small percentage of people who get hired. So doing it via things like networking events, showing up and showing genuine interest, these do go a long way. And the piece of advice I always give students is that you're not expected to have any experience as a graduate, right? Of course, some experience definitely goes in favor of your hand, but the key thing you have to do is you have to be able to show a genuine interest in what you'll be doing. You have to be able to present yourself well. You have to have good presentation skills, whether it's your own personal branding, how you speak, and I think things like empathy, for example, go a long way. Being a team player, it's all those soft skills that you require, because whilst you can develop those, through business and then through working, it's very hard to just learn those off the bat. And that's what, for example, I do at Starlite. It's very, I'm not one to really go and teach, technical skills, for example, how to use data analytics programs or how to use Excel, for example. My focus has always been on developing those soft skills, which I think is exactly what a lot of these students require. And when they get them and they understand them, it already increases their employability so much. And then networking is just a good way to make that transition even smoother.
Well, absolutely. I think those are some really critical tips that you have shared. In terms of having a short story about yourself, always ready, and having an elevator pitch of 2 minutes, as we always say, because you never know, you might be entering a lift and you meet somebody randomly. If you don't know how to explain yourself in 2 minutes, they'll forget about you. And I think that's something which George also teaches in his lessons and workshops. And I think we can also talk about the importance of having your short story and elevator pitch ready, isn't it, George?
100%. What I've generally found is that universities, TAFEs, business course colleges, they tend to teach people about the course. They don't actually teach them the business of the course. And I can assure you, Ryan, that you could do society some great favours by broadening your reach, because accountants and solicitors, they need to understand doing business, but so do doctors, so do medical scientists and people. One of my sales training courses that I run, I say, whether you've got a product, a service, a concept, an idea, if you can't sell, you can't succeed, because you need to be able to communicate, and communication is about selling your ideas to somebody. So if you can do that, but you can do it in a 15 or a 20-minute space, that's fantastic, except there's a whole lot of people that don't have 15 or 20 minutes. I was given 2 weeks' notice that I was going to Singapore, and I had the opportunity of meeting the CEO of BNI. Now, nobody else thought I had the opportunity of meeting him, but I thought I had the opportunity of meeting him. I had a 17-minute presentation that in that 2 weeks, I got down to 2.5 minutes that was still effective, because my figuring was if I got to meet the CEO, I could get him for 2.5 minutes. I wasn't going to get him for 17.5. As luck would have it, I did get to meet the CEO. He said to me, "I don't have a lot of time. What do you need?" I said, "I need you, I need me, and I need 2.5 minutes." And that's where it all started. So Sarab is 100% right. If you can't do a short burst and people got some idea as to what you do, you're not going to get it. It's not that you won't get there at all, but it means every 2-minute opportunity that you've got, you lose out on. Every 5-minute opportunity you've got, you lose out on. If all your pitch is about a 20-minute story and you've got to have 62 slides and 432 points, people don't have that time anymore. Very, very true, Sarab. And that's what I've taught my students, and that's what I teach people that come to my courses.
I think I would actually say as well, to sort of flow on from that, George, that I think two things. The first one is that is also extremely applicable when you get asked in an interview, tell me about yourself, or a bit about yourself, because that question is so broad. It's so tough to figure out what to actually focus on, right? So you're right. Having even, I remember when I went to a university event my first year where we did elevator pitches for ourselves, and they made us bring it down to 45 seconds. And I'm going, how do you answer that question in 45 seconds? And they told us there's plenty of ways to do it. One activity we did actually, which I still do with my mentees to this day, is we looked at the vision statements of the world's largest companies. And for about 90% of them, that statement is no more than 15 to 20 words. And you think these companies do such amazing and large things, yet at the core, it's just a simple idea. So I think that's a really good point you raised, and it extends just beyond our own sort of personal branding. It's how the world's most successful companies have branded themselves. They've sold themselves that way because their idea is so simple but has lots of potential for growth.
Yeah, and if you're going to do it strategically, you should have. I have a pitch if I'm going to talk to students. I have a pitch if I'm going to talk to business people. I have a pitch if I'm going to go and talk to universities. I have a pitch if I'm representing my foundation. I have a pitch if I'm representing my coaching business. So it still evolves around who am I and what do I do, but it's tuned to the audience.
Absolutely. And I think different audiences have different ways of interpreting what you are saying. So that's why it's always better that you understand what your audience is, what do they want to listen to, and kind of mold the conversation according to what they will appreciate. And I think that's a really good point, Ryan, that you shared about tell me yourself. This is a very common question in an interview. And when I was just coming out of my bachelor's, my father used to say, include 3 or 4 elements in tell me about yourself always that you can explain more about. Don't tell anything in those tell me about yourself that you can't have a follow-up story about. So my father used to say me, like, you should always have a story on every element that you share, because that's the time when you can control the interview instead of the interviewer controlling you and dominating you in the interview. Isn't it, Ryan?
100%. I think being able to back things up with personal anecdotes goes a long way. And it's a good way to also build rapport with your interviewer as well. If you can back up with what you're saying, it's one of the greatest ways to find some sort of mutual connection between interviewers and yourself. I've always said, if you keep an interview conversational from the start, the interviewer will follow that same way. But if you come in not feeling confident, you're having very dry answers, the interviewer will take on that same sort of stature. So the interview is very much in your hands, and having a good elevator pitch where you're calm and confident and collected and can talk about it for more than 2.5 minutes if you need to goes a long way. But being able to explain what you do, how you can add value to a business, and what your strengths are and what you're interested in within 2.5 minutes, 30 seconds, 45 minutes, however long your elevator pitch is, it is a very, very important thing to have. It's a must-have for any student looking to break it big.
Yep. Well, thank you so much, Ryan. I really appreciate your time. I think you shared a lot of key elements for startup founders and also for international students. So I'm sure there is going to be a lot of value for a different set of audiences from one episode itself. We can share different snippets out of this one episode. So stay tuned for that. And of course, we would love you to share it again on your page. Oh,
without a doubt. Absolutely. I'd love for people to see this. Thank you for having me. And it was great to obviously see you again, Saurabh. It was great to meet you virtually as well, George. There's great insights from this podcast. I feel like I also learn a lot while being on here, while giving advice at the same time.
This is an ultimate global podcast. Hello, and welcome to our special weekly podcast on trending international and social affairs. You're listening to Saurabh Kora and George Mavros from Sydney.